My name's Sandra Billiard. I'm 53 years of age and I was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome last year at the age of 52. I think the most obvious thing is that there's nothing about me that looks particularly different to anyone else. So the way I walk, the way I move and things, there's nothing to suggest to other people who are just walking past me that there's a problem. So I struggle with noise and things, but people are not going to realise that. So I might be sitting in a situation that most people are quite comfortable with, whereas I'm being bombarded by sound, lights, other sensory things that might be going on. So already before anything's happened, I'm feeling quite anxious, but that is not going to be visible to other people. So I tend to think of Asperger's as being a little bit like an iceberg, in that some things are visible on the surface. People might notice that I'm a little bit tense or anxious or not communicating particularly well. But most of what is going on for me is actually hidden. It's going on inside of me, it's going on in my head. And there's a kind of myth about people with Asperger's not having empathy and not being terribly emotional. Actually, it's completely opposite for me. I'm extremely emotional and I feel things very deeply. What happens is it's a delayed reaction. So when I'm in a situation and something's happened and someone's upset, I'm not going to figure that out straight away. What will happen is I'll go home, I'll ponder on it all, and then I'll work out that actually some kind of a response was probably required from me. It's too late then. The event happened several hours ago. It's too late to go and say, oh, I'm terribly sorry about that, or are you okay then? Because a person probably won't even know what I'm talking about. So then there's that feeling of guilt, because I think, well, I should have seen that. I should have understood that they were upset. I think for me, certainly working in an open plan office is very difficult. So having facilities where I could work on my own quietly in an office without the distraction of telephones, conversation, other computer noises and printers and things would be great. I think to understand too that I can multitask when it is actually tasks. What I struggle with is multitasking when I'm trying to do a piece of work and I'm trying to multitask that with social things, because social things take a lot more energy and effort for me. I haven't driven my car for 10-11 weeks now. I won't go out on the road. It's partly parking because I've had back surgery. I do have a blue badge, although looking at the new instructions, I'm not sure it's still valid anymore. But I feel embarrassed using that anyway. And most blue badge spots are actually, they've thought about the proximity to the building, but that's not the issue for me. I can walk for miles. I went to Alderney and walked 14 miles. What I need is to be able to open the door, because I've got to be careful about the bend and twist. I've got a little car, a little perodua. You've got to sort of bend into a pretzel to get in and out of it. And if I'm doing that with a small space, I have a real problem. But, I can't take up a blue badge spot that somebody else needs when I'm perfectly capable of walking. What I tend to do is park right at the end of the car park, miles away from the shop, where most people are not prepared to walk that distance, and then it's relatively safe. But the big issue now is these new LED lights on all the cars, these little strips of lights. And I really struggle with those, and that was the thing that prompted the specs initially, because they were so uncomfortable. And now on the roads there's just so many cars. At first I thought it was a gimmick, a few people had them, but nearly every car, well, all the new cars now, I think it's an EU regulation, and one of my garages told me they're putting them on the back of cars as well, and I thought, no. And it's so uncomfortable, I just don't want to drive, and it confuses everything, all these lights. So sooner or later my little environmentally friendly car will be forced off the roads because I just can't stand it. So it's a real shame, but it's an EU regulation. I don't think we're going to change that one, but there you go. And the other thing is when you're behind people at the traffic lights and they sit with their foot on the brakes, so you've got the whole back of the car is lit up like a Christmas tree. I'm sitting there going, please take your foot off the brake, you use a handbrake, and things like that. So driving now, and it's so busy and noisy on the road, so much movement, I can't be doing with it. So hence the bike, which is not always going to be weather friendly, but because I'm at a different angle to the cars, and on a bike, instead of looking at cars that are coming towards you tend to be looking more down for potholes and other obstructions in the road. I'm not so bothered by the lights, and I will actually drive without my specs, cycle rather without my specs most of the time. But driving's a nightmare, absolute nightmare. Now, waiting areas can be a huge challenge for me. You've often got a TV screen, you've got either a radio or a soundtrack on the TV screen. That, together with all the noise from reception, will have phones, people talking, there might be children, and for some reason they home in on the noisiest toys in the toy box, and they rattle and squeak and bells and things. So all of that going on, I've now changed the way I deal with GP appointments, and I go at the end of the day, or I check in, I go and stand outside, and they give me a shout when it's time for my appointment. I mean, basically all my life I've had difficulties, but it's been a sort of vague sense of not fitting in, being a little bit out of sync with the rest of the world and other people, not quite getting what's going on in situations and things like that, but nothing that I could really fix a name to. And I've had a long history of mental health difficulties, had lots of different diagnoses over the years. And then finally somebody said, I think you've got Asperger syndrome. And they recommended some books and some websites and things. I had a look, and straight away there was that connection. I thought, yeah, this makes sense. Because all of the other diagnoses, there was always this little bit tagged on the end about saying, well, you don't quite fit the criteria with that. And it made sense then, because what don't quite fit is how this feels, that you don't quite fit in with people, with the world. What I didn't realise is that I was dealing with a whole bombardment of sound and noises that apparently other people tune out a lot of things. So if I'm in a supermarket, I'm hearing all of the conversations, the noise from the tills, the humming of the fridges, and all these things at pretty much the same level. So that's a huge amount of sensory input. And then you have the visual side of it, you have the lights, flickering fridges, people moving about, lots of different colours and lines and patterns. So your brain is trying to deal with all of that, and you might be shopping with someone who's trying to have a conversation with you, and somewhere in the midst of all this chaos you have to work out what they're saying and make a reasonable response. And it takes a huge amount of energy to actually do that on a day-to-day basis. So the condition, for me anyway, is quite exhausting, and I often do get very tired just doing quite simple things that other people just do without even thinking about. And one of the challenges I've found trying to talk about Asperger's and some of the symptoms and traits that go with it is that a lot of people will say, oh, well, I feel like that, or I experience that. And there is obviously an overlap. It's a spectrum, and there are lots of people who might be bothered by lights sometimes, or might be bothered by noise, and so that's really irritating me. It's a matter of degree, and it's how much it impacts. And so people can relate a little bit to what I'm saying. What I struggle with is when they sort of do it in a dismissive way, so it almost feels as if they're saying, well, what are you making a fuss about? I get annoyed by children bouncing a ball out in the garden, it is an irritating sound. What they don't realise is that the level of stress for me, listening to a child bouncing a ball for half an hour, I will be really seriously uptight, and I won't only be dealing with that because there'll be other sensory issues as well, so I will find that quite draining. Socially now, I meet up with Anne Blundell from Autism Guernsey regularly. She's also supporting me in my search for work. And I also meet up with a volunteer called Jo, and we've started talking about social things and reading people, and Jo in particular is helping me with that. And I myself have sourced some images of faces, quite simple little pictures, and I'm basically trying to learn social skills. In my early 50s, things that most people have picked up as a child and just done instinctively, I'm actually having to make an effort to try and learn these things and try and learn a little bit about facial expressions and emotions and non-verbal communication, which most of the time I miss. I don't look at people very often. I might make little short glances, but I'll tend to look past them or look at the floor. So I know that there are non-verbal signals about how people are feeling. What I can't do is to actually read those and interpret them, and often I simply don't even see them because I'm not looking at the person. It's such a short glance that there isn't time to pick up on those subtleties. But I am trying to learn some of those things now. So computers and things make sense to me. I'm almost entirely self-taught, and people have said to me, gosh, and how do you know all this stuff? You must have done dozens and dozens of courses. I haven't. I just sit down and I play with the thing and I explore it. And things like technology and things like that, machines make sense. Mm-hmm. There's a logic to them. Mm-hmm. There isn't any logic to people. They do unexpected things. They don't tell you what they want and what they mean. They say one thing and they mean something else. And they say something, but their body language is saying something different. But I won't know that. I will only hear the words. I'll hear what they say, and I'll take that as being what they mean. So all those subtleties are lost on me. With general interactions with people, eye contact is a very uncomfortable thing for me, so I tend not to look at them. I might just glance at them a little bit. But if eye contact is forced, or I do end up making eye contact, then I find it hard to look away. So my eyes will kind of get locked on theirs. I'll then get increasingly panicky and anxious. I may well start talking gibberish and not making sense. I know I'm doing that. The other person realises I'm doing it. That fuels the anxiety, so it gets harder and harder. So actually letting me not make eye contact and just look away from the person will actually allow me to concentrate and listen to what they're saying. If I have to look at them, I'm less likely to take in what they've said. I'm sure there are lots of people out there that are perhaps wondering, am I on the spectrum, and having that there's that question hovering over them. And for some, they might choose never to explore that. Others are going to want to know. And if it prompts somebody to explore that more and to perhaps seek a diagnosis, then that'll be great. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And the diagnosis, although I think there are people who are worried that having a label would in itself put up barriers and create issues, I haven't found that it does at all. And when I take the view that if it's an issue for people in something I want to do or a place I want to work, if they have a real problem with it, then it probably isn't the right place for me to be working or getting involved in an activity. So I think these days people are more understanding and there is a greater awareness, but there's still work to do on that. And we'll get there.